Welcome everyone to another week of Liberty Chat, our weekly podcast brought to you from the Liberal Democrats, talking about all things liberty or the lack thereof around the country and beyond. And you may see a different little group here so far tonight. We've got Mr. John Ruddick, our lead New South Wales Senate candidate up there in Sydney. How are you, John?
Terrific, Kirsty. Nice to see you again.
And I didn't introduce myself. Yes, my name is Kirsty. And we have the indubitable Mr. Ross Cameron filling in tonight for Campbell and David Limbrick. Ross, how are you?
I'm on a roll.
Where are you?
I am currently in a Meriton hotel, so described, otherwise known as SHA, S-H-A, which is the acronym developed by New South Wales Health to describe, I think it is something like segregated hotel accommodation. Anyway, it's mandatory COVID isolation for the Roscoe.
Oh, but I keep hearing from the likes of Claire Lehman, etc., that these hotel quarantine and camps is all lovely and voluntary. It's like a holiday for 2 weeks, right?
Yeah. Well, look, what I thought I might do, since you've made the mistake of inviting me, I'll show you. I'll just give you the quick tour so you get the atmosphere. Now, the point is, okay, so this is the view. It's what I would call a sort of Harry Triggerboff paradise. Love you, Harry. Then you walk in and it's a pretty stock standard hotel room. But the thing, there's just a couple of details you should get if you want to understand. So, here it is, standard room, little bit of a workstation. Now, if you're 6'1.5", as I am, the most important thing is for recovery from serious illnesses like COVID is sleep. So naturally, you have to spend a week in a single bed,
No.
And when you say, well, any chance of a double, they say, oh, well, you just push those two together. Well, I suppose that's a certain amount of innovation, isn't it? Now, what I will show you, this is quite interesting because we're now at the kitchen sink. And you will notice here a high pressure coffee compressor.
Oh, that's pretty fancy.
Now, that is brought into the hotel from an external because, and it is completely useless. The reason is, I'll get out and show you breakfast under hotel quarantine. Here we go. So this is breakfast. It comes in a nicely sealed plastic bag.
Ew.
You get some natural muesli in a plastic bag. You get some high nutrition value wheat Bix, top shelf, that stuff. You get some Paul's long life milk.
Ew.
And the important thing is the vital critical ingredient you get is the Moccona instant coffee. Right. So there you go. Now you do get something like that in another plastic bag. Yep. And then finally you get a bottle of water in a plastic bag. So the point is, I said to them, I can't start my day psychologically with long life milk and a sachet of Moccona.
No.
Okay? It's going to destroy my soul. If I have to start the day. So I said to them, can I bring in my own coffee maker? They said, yes, Mr. Cameron, you may bring in your own coffee maker, which I did. Now, there is an appliance which goes with this, and it goes with the fresh coffee beans, okay, and it goes with the milk frother.
Yes.
But when that appliance arrived, the triage delivery nurse explained that the steamer was a fire hazard, so I couldn't have the coffee maker.
Now, Ross, I'm getting text messages from people asking if you've got COVID. Why are you in the gulag?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, look, I became a casual, so-called close contact of the boy who arrived from Doha, parents fully vaccinated, double masked, and he got off the plane and became the first positive Omicron case. And I, by a kind of accident, wound up being a contact of him, a close contact of him and his family.
Wow.
And when he subsequently tested positive, they rang me and said, Mr. Campbell, 6 days later, my dear,
whilst you've been walking around for 6 days.
Around for 6 days.
Yes.
You must immediately isolate. Go home straight away. Have yourself a test, pack your bag in isolation and wait for us to send the driver to pick you up. Have no contact with anybody else. And of course, I'm speaking to you at the moment with rather tender nostrils because every time I see a uniformed person, they want to shove something up my nose. Having already returned 3 negative tests, you know, I've apparently only got, I think I've got either 1 or 2 more to go before I am released back out of captivity.
Wow. Yes. Okay. So that's just because you were near someone who had tested positive and they actually can't pick you up. That doesn't sound very voluntary either, or very like a holiday, very much like a holiday. Okay. Well, we shall move on from that, Ross. We will be having an update from David Limbrick towards the end of the episode tonight, so stay tuned for that as well. There are a lot of comments about you there, Ross, in the chat box, so you might want to check that out as well. John, let's have a little bit of an update from you this week. What have you been up to in the last week?
Well, I wrote an article in the Spectator online, which was published on Friday. It was called Why I Won't Take the COVID Vaccine. And it was like it's had a lot of clicks, and
yes.
It was #1 on the website for quite a while.
Yes, and it's in the chat box right now. So if anyone wants to read that, check that out right there.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you, Kirsty. Okay, the guts of that article is this: mankind has achieved a lot of enormously positive things over the last 5,000 years when we started becoming civilized. But there is a dark side to human nature, which we can't quite explain why it's there, but it is there. And it's not, and it's called minority persecution. It's like there's people want to gang up from time to time against a little defenseless minority. And it happens all over the world. It's happened in Europe on numerous occasions. It happens in Africa. Every few years, we hear about it happening in the Papuan highlands. Where the rumor goes around a few villages that there's a witch, and you need to get the witch, you need to kill the witch. Okay, now it happened. It's just part of our nature. Now I thought liberal democracies were meant to have overcome this. What's happening now with the COVID, the persecution of the unvaxxed, is obviously not in the league of these pogroms and holocausts of the past. But the point of the article was, there are very clear early warning signs. And that's what's happening now. This irrational malice towards the unvaxxed is alarming. And I wanted to put it on the record. Now, I obviously would prefer to live in a society where people don't have to disclose what their medical status is. That's you'd think that's a normal thing. But no, I wanted to come out.
It was normal. It was normal 2 years ago, yes.
That's right. I wanted to come out and say point blank, I haven't taken it and I won't take it, okay? I'm going to stand with the persecuted minority, and I think that there are reasonable grounds for a small group of people to have some skepticism about the vaccine. So that has been, hopefully people can have a look at it in the chat box. Thanks for putting it up.
It's a great piece, and obviously we've shared it all over our social media as well, and Facebook, and obviously it's been on Twitter as well. I'm actually reading the Robert Kennedy Jr. book called The Real Anthony Fauci, which is terrifying, to be honest, about the whole sort of movement, not just about Fauci, but about it all itself. But that's a really great read if anyone is interested in looking that one up. Now,
Kirsty, sorry to intervene, just on John's point, okay, that this element of human nature, we don't really know where it comes from. Some of the anthropologists say that it comes from the fact that we lived for hundreds of thousands of years in small tribal groups who would then encounter a stranger from a different group and had to form a judgment about what to do with the stranger. I have noted that as the levels of fear in a community rise, the levels of reason dissolve and we fall back into this animalistic primal state. But I just finished with the observation of Jordan Peterson, who I saw recently. I'll try and find the grab and put it in the comments. But he talked about the research, which shows indeed that the higher the perception of medical infection, the higher the levels of totalitarian belief at the local level, and the stronger the impulse to erect hard borders. And he said that in 2017, before this whole thing arrived, which I thought was quite instructive.
True. Once again, there's a heap more comments in the chat. Everyone is getting very chatty in there, which is great. Now, we do have two very wonderful guests tonight that we're going to go into right now. We have Rukshan, Fernando and Topher Field. Rukshan, better known as Real Rukshan. And we'd like to welcome Rukshan and Topher onto Liberty Chat.
Hey, guys. Thanks for having us.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having us. Yep.
Thank you so much, guys, for joining us. As well, I mean, you're both rather celebrities these days.
The funny thing about being a celebrity is that you don't decide that you're a celebrity. It's everyone else that decides that. If that's what right. You guys have decided, then that's great. But look, I just do what I do. And Rukshan, I'm sure you feel the same way.
Well, I definitely feel the same way.
Turning up with a big cigar, I think that makes you
that's pretty based.
This is my security blanket. I can't do interviews without one.
Now, I'm sure that most people listening and watching tonight are very aware of the two of you, but just very briefly, I just want to ask you individually, where did you come from? Not biologically, but how did you end up in this position where you've become quite huge independent journalist? We'll start with you, Topher.
Sure. So I started 12 years ago. I began actually on a bit of a dare that my cousin gave me. I did a video about the water situation. We were at stage 3A water restrictions during the Millennium Drought. I did a video about why the desal plant was a bad idea and we should be building a dam on the Mitchell River instead. It was an application to an ABC TV show. They naturally didn't select me for the show because obviously my politics weren't correct. I wanted to build a dam. So I was left with this video that I'm like, well, what do I do with that? So I started someone just said in the chat, Andrew Williams said the little government that can. No, long before that, my friend, long before that. I had this video. I had nothing left to do with it. So I started a brand new YouTube channel and stuck it on there and thought my mum would watch it and that would be about it. And people just began to share it amongst themselves and one thing led to another. And there I was doing a second video, a fifth video, a 20th video. And then, of course, when COVID kicked off, all of a sudden I sort of gained, I guess, a level of traction. Like I said, you know, it's true. You don't decide whether you're a celebrity or not. You don't decide whether you're an influencer or not. It's other people that decide that on your behalf. And other people seemed to decide that they liked what I had to say and wanted to hear more of it. And all of a sudden, here I am.
Yeah. Well, I mean, even the work that you did on all the Murray-Darling stuff like that, that was huge. And there were really no other journalists doing anything like that. It was really quite incredible what you did there. Thank you. Rukshan, what about yourself? So we all know that you were a wedding photographer, obviously affected by lockdowns. Give us a quick rundown.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much my journey. But I think this is my lockdown hobby, independent journalism. So
well, it's better than putting on weight, which is what most of us did. So, you know.
Well, yeah. Some people took on cooking at home and so forth, and I took up making memes and doing independent journalism. So it really started from doing the memes and just kind of engaging politically through that kind of, I guess, the creative stuff through that. And then, you know, eventually I ended up hitting the street, doing some street journalism and capturing what was happening in my city. And yes, as a business owner, it was impacting me as well. So I had a vested interest in what was going on in my city. So, and then one thing kind of led to another. And yeah, it's all kind of happened very organically for me in terms of what I'm doing. And I can echo a lot of what Topher said as well. So, you know, I'm not necessarily going out there looking for people to, you know, follow me and all this kind of stuff. I'm more just putting out the work, capturing what's happening, creating the content, and, you know, people seem to really, there seems to be a need for that in the community. And I think that's what's been, you know, a part of, you know, if I can term what I'm doing as being a success, that's what's been a part of it. I think just the need for that kind of content and, you know, the videos that I'm doing during this time.
And I think that's part of the real difference. And what I was thinking earlier, like the difference between what both of you gentlemen are doing and comparing that with mainstream media. Like we can see the views that you get on your live stream is really quite incredible. The mainstream media get nothing like that, and all the money that they pour into that, but also just the reception that you get from the people at these rallies and protests. People love you. Like everyone's trying to get on the camera. Everyone wants a photo with you. And there has been some attacks on mainstream journalists, which is not good, and no one would condone any of that. But it just shows the level of distrust that people have for mainstream news, because you just can't even watch it half the time. And with what you're doing, you're not even giving any commentary. All you're doing is really just filming everyone, listening to people. You're not making any giving any biased opinions on it. Now, John's been to some of the rallies and protests up in Sydney, and obviously there's different journalists that are appearing up there as well. And what are your thoughts on the comparison now and the rise of these independent journalists, John?
Well, can I say Rukshan and Topher are pretty famous in Sydney too. I promise you that. I mean, a lot of people talk about them. Look, it's a different situation in Sydney. This time next week, our Premier has told us that we are going to be, that you know, all people, including the unvaxxed, are going to be given pretty much total freedom. And look, you know, there wasn't a huge difference in terms of the policy between Gladys Berejiklian and Dan Andrews, but the difference was, I mean, it was worse in Victoria, but Dan Andrews seemed to enjoy it. He seemed to relish the oppression he was giving to people, whereas Gladys, who I'm not a fan of, who I don't think is that bright, she's overrated, but she always did seem a bit sort of, you know, concerned about it. So, look, let's hope like hell that you know, this is a huge positive for the internet, that we can have these genuinely popular people like Rukshan and Topher genuinely build a real audience, you know, not through nothing but talent and nothing but sort of incisive comments and gutsy journalism. Let's hope that this is the way of the future. The only thing that could stop it is if it's sort of like crushed by commercial interests. But look, you know, so far, I think this is just the beginning of an exciting new industry that can hopefully replace the corporate media.
They can't stop us. The corporate interests in the media can't stop us. This is too organic, too genuine. Yes. Now, I want to say for the record, I'm a massive fan of Rukshan's. I fangirled the first time we really actually kind of met properly. But Rukshan, I do have a bit of a bone to pick with you. I'm very jealous about the fact that you've been carried on people's shoulders. You were carried in the crowd. And that's never going to happen to me unless I lose about 40 kilograms first.
Yes, you're a rather small man. Yeah.
So you've got that on me, and I will never get that back. But look, I think he deserved it. And you know, I'm a big fan of your work, and as you know, I genuinely believe Rukshan became the most important person. Particularly, there was a particular inflection point as we hit the CFMEU protests here in Melbourne. Rukshan's getting 150,000 people on his feed. Channel 7 is getting 2,000 people watching. Correct. There was a hunger to see the truth of what was really going on. And when Rukshan is walking around after the Federal Labor Party came out and said it was a bunch of Nazi babies or whatever, and Rukshan's walking up to people going, "Oh, are you a Nazi baby?" That work was phenomenal and incredibly important. And Rukshan, I genuinely believe that you changed the way that the mainstream media report on us now. They are less aggressive against us, and they are somewhat more honest than they used to be. And I believe that it was you that made that difference right in the middle of all those protests.
Well, and even the reach that Rukshan gets, and this is why David Limbrick actually invited Rukshan to his Senate candidate announcement, because we know there's no point asking a whole bunch of mainstream media. They're not going to care. They're not going to care. Within a couple of hours, Rukshan's stream, I noticed, was about 140,000 views within less than 2 hours. Like, that's incredible. For a minor political party Senate candidate announcement, we would never get that on mainstream media. There is a question here, Rukshan, from Andrew saying, can you do a video on your lighting? It's amazing.
I use Philips Hue lighting, and I don't know if you've seen them. You can get it from Officeworks, and just a few key lights. But yeah, obviously, like, compared to all you guys, I've paid a bit of attention to my setup here because that's my field of work, video. So I've gone all out. I'm not trying to outdo you guys.
hey, my setup took a lot of work. It took me a week to get through that bottle and another week to get through that bottle, and that took me a couple of weeks. I mean, that's a lot of work right there.
I've got a Christmas decoration now. I'm going all Christmassy now. So thank you very much. Now, we also know, Rukshan, that you are a Trump-loving white supremacist, apparently. And I know that you've sort of been following politics somewhat beforehand. And I know that John Ruddick is very keen to talk about Trump and the American elections at all times. And I know Topher's very well informed as well. What are your thoughts, perhaps, on the next American election?
Yeah, look, I think it's shaping up to be one of the most, I guess, pivotal elections of our time, especially the way it looks like if Trump will actually rerun for the election. So I think it's going to be, the election that stops the world, possibly. Everyone's going to pay attention to what's happening there. And, the way that Joe Biden's been running the country, it's very obvious that there are lots of issues there. And I think we're going to see, a spectacle come in the next few months even. It might start. So, yeah, I'm really looking forward to that. I might even actually go to America this time around that time and try to live stream some of the stuff that's going on there. Let's see.
Yes. Actually, Topher, Adam says here, I would have carried you, but you have put on a bit of weight during lockdown.
Actually, I wish I could blame lockdown. I've put on a bit of weight since I got married. That was the real turning point for me.
Yeah,
but
love does that.
I'm going to blame lockdown because it makes me look less bad. I was in the US in 2016, just before the presidential election that Trump won. And I came back here, and my wife and I, both of us, were absolutely certain that Trump was going to win. When you were on the ground over there, it was very, very obvious. Now, temper that with the fact that I also thought Trump was going to win in 2020, and I was wrong about that one. We can argue about whether that was genuine or not, but in the end, the way it ran, I was wrong about that one. But I did pick the 2016 election, and there is something about being on the ground. And Rukshan, if you can get there, something about being on the ground that gives you a finger on the pulse that you just cannot get from the other side of the world.
Yes. Well, there's actually another comment here from Peter, who says people are coming to realise that what the mainstream media is presenting as truth is not meshing with what they're seeing, hearing and experiencing. It's little wonder that independent media is growing in significance, and hence the importance of both of you gentlemen here tonight.
Yeah, I mean, just on that, I mean, one of the things that I do is that it's so simple. I just go out there and hit record on the camera, and it's just it's not hard to do. Yes. So these networks that have so much funding, they have the journalists, the reporters on the ground that can do this. They choose not to. They choose rather to involve themselves in creating certain narratives that mesh with whatever thing that they want to push out to the public. Whereas what I'm doing is just showing people for who they are. And whatever's happening there is happening. And I think people kind of gravitate towards that more because it's actually real. It's the real world that we live in.
Yes.
And, I think there's value in showing reality. And I think this live streaming that's happening all around the world, especially during this COVID pandemic time, we're seeing footage coming from live streamers and mobile phones rather than the media that's actually telling the story of what's happening. And, it's a very interesting space for us to be in the West, where we're getting stuff from mobile phones and live streams rather than the media. That's normally what you'd get from like China or North Korea. We'd get a video leaked of something that's happening. That's what's happening in Australia and England and in America right now. We're getting these leaked videos almost of things that are going on in the countries. And it's just very interesting time to be alive.
Well, there's that great expression. It used to be that the media told you what happened and you had to decide what to think. Now the media tells you what to think, and you have
Correct.
to decide whether it actually happened.
Correct.
I love Peter Clay's comment here. Rukshan takes things out of context by showing everything unedited. Thanks, Media Watch. So I would describe Rukshan as a journalist because he does exactly what he just said. He points a camera, he hits record, he hits stream, and the world can see it and make up their own mind. I'm one of the bad guys in the sense that I would describe myself as a commentator. I'm not going out live and journaling and documenting in real time what's happening. I'm taking what comes to me from people like Rukshan and many others that are doing incredible work, along with what comes out of the mainstream media and press releases from political parties, etc. And I try and make sense of it and then sit down with my audience on a slow chat or in an interview or whatever it may be and kind of decipher and understand it. And I would add a third person into this, and apologies, he's not universally popular, but Avi, who I personally, the few times I've met him, I actually quite like him. I would describe him as a reporter. He's out there putting a microphone under other people's mouths and saying, tell me what you think. And so each of us, Avi, Rukshan, and myself, have fallen into very different roles, just naturally, organically, because that's what we wanted to do. And have actually, without meaning to, really created a real kind of nexus, a network, unofficial network of news sources that really does start to cover the gamut of journalistic disciplines and offer an alternative view to people that want it.
Exactly. And Scott actually says real Rukshan versus Tim Pool, like when you're in the US. What, besides Liberty Chat, obviously, which podcast would you actually like to be on when you go to the US next year, Rukshan?
Well, I am
besides
a big fan
Joe
of Tim Pool. Tim Pool, and there's a few others I follow from America: Jack Posobiec, Mike Cernovich, and of course Candace Owens.
Yes.
But yeah, there's lots of great, conservative commentators within the US who are doing great things. And I think it's amazing that we're kind of getting that same kind of, podcast culture here in Australia as well.
Yes.
And a lot more kind of, conservative voices as well popping up and talking. And, I think it's a great thing. And, I'm really enjoying all the content that I'm seeing and all the new creators and stuff that are coming on board and people being politically engaged. It's been amazing to see in Australia, because for a long time, a lot of that kind of, people discussing whether it's freedom or liberty, whatever it is, has been coming from the United States. And to see it happening here a lot more as well, especially from the younger generation, it's amazing to see.
Well, you can do a real media blitz once you're over there. That'll be really quite interesting. Once again, there's a lot more comments in here as well. Adam says Nick Holt is a good local podcast. I don't actually know that one. Do either of you know Nick Holt?
No, I don't actually.
I think he's in Brisbane. Yeah,
I did an interview with him today. He's got a very big following. He's got a professional little setup. He interviewed Miranda Devine a week ago about her new book.
Okay.
So look, he's a good guy to be. He's a true believer. So he's definitely worth taking some interest in.
Excellent. Well, there's a lot of comments here saying he's on Twitter and great on Twitter, et cetera, et cetera. Actually, whilst the two of you are here again, I'll ask a question here from Gary. Who says, why is the mainstream media not inquiring about who gave the order to open fire on unarmed people who pose no threat to the police? And that's obviously something that the two of you saw at the protest when it was still illegal to protest, but nothing from mainstream media about that.
The mainstream media, in my opinion, have backed themselves into a corner where to actually start asking those hard questions involves them having to admit that they were part of the problem. They were championing the government's overreaction. And to turn around now and start asking the hard questions of the government about some of those overreactions, that's going to come back to haunt them. So they just kind of want to move on. We do see the media changing their narrative and acknowledging new realities as we go forward, but never in the context of going back and admitting they were wrong, never in the context of really challenging the powers that be that made the decisions in the past. It's all very in the real time. It's that 1984 perpetual present. They're never willing to look back into the past, in my opinion.
That's right. And there's a comment here from Melissa who says, it has shocked and dismayed me how many people didn't care when the police were shooting the protesters. That was pretty disgusting. Now, another question here, because we've got two Sydney-siders on our panel, but we've got two Melbourneites here in our guest list. I'll ask this question here. This is slightly related, but what's the take on the Victor Labor's internal conflict over the last week or so?
Pass the popcorn.
and Rukshan. Yeah, pass the popcorn.
Rukshan, what do you reckon?
Oh, look, I haven't really been following it, to be honest. I've just been too busy going to rallies every single day in Melbourne, in Victoria. I've just been focusing on doing that. I haven't focused on the Labor shenanigans, but yeah, I think Topher's a bit more versed in this.
Look, Rukshan does the real work. I get to sit back at home and just digest information. I live on social media. It's the laziest living you can possibly imagine. Look, we've got a situation where last I heard 7 Labor MPs have already said they're not running for re-election, and a further 7 Labor MPs are expected to not get their pre-selection. So they're already sitting Labor MPs. And by default, normally, if you're a sitting MP, they're going to kind of pre-select you most of the time by default automatically, not always. To have 7 on top of the 7 that have said they're not going to run is a pretty extraordinary thing. And they've come out and already said, hey, if some of them have, if we don't get pre-selected, we are going to resign and force a by-election. Now, can I say this? Number one, pass the popcorn. It's going to be brilliant. It's going to be great viewing. Number two, this is a huge opportunity for the Liberal Democrats. If there is a by-election forced in this manner, it is going to be messy, it is going to be ugly, and it is a huge opportunity for someone like Liberal Democrats where you don't have the resources, or I should say we now, because I'm a member now, we don't have the resources to necessarily blanket the entire state the way that other parties do, but we can blanket a single electorate. If there is a by-election, we can run a really good ground game in that one by-election and really, really give them a fright. Could we snatch a seat? I don't know. But can we give them a scare? Definitely.
Yes, exactly.
Are these 7 resignations and 7 pre-selections under threat? Are we talking about federal Labor or state Labor?
This is state Labor. So 7 Labor MPs have already announced that they're not going to recontest their seat at the next election. And it was leaked to the Herald Sun that apparently there's another 7 because of factional infighting within the Labor Party, Victorian Labor Party. There's another 7 that are not going to get their pre-selection. And some of them have come out and said, if that happens, we are immediately resigning and forcing a by-election. It's very exciting. That smile on Kirsty's face. That's it. I've
been following diligently Voice of Victoria. She is excellent at putting everything
Emily's amazing.
In a too long didn't read version. She is so good at putting all those little clips together. Yeah, it's been fantastic. And yes, who needs to watch reality TV? It's all happening right here in Victoria right now. Now, guys, I'm going to let you go unless there's anything else you want to say. We also want to know, like, how can we support you? Because there actually was one question from a gentleman earlier who said we can buy Topher's shirts. How can we support Rukshan? Please shill for yourselves right now. How do we follow you? How do we support you?
Rukshan, you go. Come on, man. How do we help you?
Look, I mean, right now, for me,
book a wedding. Book a wedding photographer. Yes.
Book a wedding, yeah. I'm fortunate enough to be, well, not fortunate. I'm supporting myself. But the thing for me was when I started doing all this, I knew that I'd eventually have to go back to my business as a wedding photographer, wedding videographer, director of a company. So, you know, I have to find that balance between doing this type of, live streaming or political work, whatever it is, journalism, and doing my everyday business. And I really wanted to find, my balance. And once I find that balance, I think, if I need support or help from the people that follow me and like my work and enjoy my work, I will definitely, ask for that at that time. But at present, I really wanted to just make sure that I was in it for the right reasons and in it for the long run as well. I didn't want to just kind of do this stuff during the, this crazy time in our lives during the pandemic and then disappear forever. It's something that I'd like to do long term. So I really want to just kind of get myself in that right frame of mind. So at the present, there's no way to support me besides following me. So please follow my work on Facebook at The Real Rukshan, on YouTube at The Real Rukshan, Twitter, Telegram, and Instagram. And that's the best way to support me, just by following my work, sharing my work, commenting, doing all that kind of stuff. That really kind of, that's what motivates me in terms of continue to do my work, that people are still engaging with what I'm doing. And in the future, if I want to make T-shirts and, start a T-shirt factory like Topher, I'll turn to Topher for some advice.
Well, I tell you what, Rukshan,
figure out how to do the T-shirts.
I think we need to get you on our fundraising team, because there are so many comments in here going, how do we give Rukshan money? How do we give him money? What's his business name?
Can I chip in on that, Kirsty?
We need you on our fundraising committee. Thanks very much, Rukshan. And Topher, how do we
can I chip in on that? Look, I've been doing this for 12 years. For 11 years, I took the same approach as what Rukshan is talking about here. I didn't feel comfortable. It just didn't feel right to me that people were supporting me financially. I did raise money for specific projects. I was comfortable with that. This money goes to that project. And yes, I paid myself something out of each of those projects, although I did actually lose money on one of them, but that's another story. But to actually say, hey, support me, I was never comfortable with. And then we hit COVID. And I sat there and I had this moment of realization that because I'd been, and it flipped everything on its head, and I realized I wasn't being humble. I was actually being too proud, if that makes sense. And because I hadn't been humble enough to say, hey, guys, I need the financial resources to grow what I do. My platform was a fraction of the size of what it could have been when COVID came along. And I sat there suddenly going, how much more of an influence could I have had if only I hadn't had this false humility of not being willing to accept it and actually just gone, yes, I need money because I need to build a team. I'm not God. I can't do everything myself. I'm not good at everything. I need to build a team around me that can plug the gaps of what I'm not good at. And together we can rise far beyond where I ever could on my own. So that's why it's only been in the last 4 months or so that I've really begun to actually monetize what I do in any meaningful way, shape or form. So I make no apology for it. Here we go. Good people break bad laws. Hoodies, t-shirts. Jump on my Facebook page or on my Instagram. The link tree in my Instagram has the link to where you can buy all this stuff. And Rukshan, I'm working alongside Craig Backman and William, an artist, and a couple of others to launch their t-shirts on my platform. So if you do decide that you want to go for it and you want to monetize this so that you can build a team and make it sustainable, I would be very happy to partner with you as well.
Brilliant.
Thanks, mate. I might do like a underwear line or a lingerie line.
Well, that's what Michael Malice does, and
as long as it's pink. As long as
Michael
it's all
Malice
pink.
then calls himself an underwear model. It's it's pretty awesome. He's one of my favorite podcasters in the US. Maybe if you get over there to see him. But yeah, lots of people are like, well, actually, Paul says undies with your face on the crotch.
Yeah. AK-47 fluffy handcuff line. Perfect. You would sell so many of those.
The Rukshan fluffy underwear line with Rukshan as the model. Okay. Well, now that we're degenerating into something really quite silly now, I will say thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us. I hope you stay in a little bit or as long as you can in the chat box because there's lots of people in there that love you both. And thank you once again for joining us on Liberty Chat, Rukshan and Topher.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Very good.
Now, I'm going to say there is a question. There is a comment here really for Ross Cameron, now that Ross has been going to the fridge and doing everything else here. Now, this is from Bentley, who says, does Ross have the ability to request a medical consultation and or access to medical services from external providers? Can a doctor or nurse provide treatment to him in the hotel, and or can Ross travel to consult a medical professional in a private room via private transport, or has he no rights to leave the premises?
Well, look, I appreciate the question. And indeed, as you can imagine, my mind has turned to some of the ethical and philosophical questions of mandatory containment, refinement, imprisonment. I feel a little bit bad in a way, because I should make it clear that when New South Wales Health called me and said that we require you to go into mandatory isolation, my natural Celtic, Scottish, Cameron, Highland hackles immediately raised. And I said to Jill at New South Wales Health, who's paying for this operation? And she said, we are.
Oh.
Which basically means, Kirsty, you are.
That's right.
So I said, I thought about the idea of 7 days of isolation. And I thought, that sounds like paradise. If you are paying. So
I had to pay for my own hotel quarantine. That sucks.
Yeah. So I kind of accepted the offer. But I have to tell you, the kind of torment and torture, and there is this Greek tradition that one should never criticize your host in a sense that they're paying, right? So it's a little bit ungrateful of me to say I don't like. I told them after I saw the first sack of food they delivered in a plastic bag outside my door, that's the last sack of food I require from New South Wales Health, because I'm actually trying to get healthy. I'm not trying to destroy my health. But all I would say is, if I was not enjoying, I wish I had more isolation just between you and me. You know,
we won't tell your family, it's fine.
You know, apparently, according to the research, the female usually expects to use 22,000 words each day. The male expects to use about 10,000. I've got sort of immediately surrounded by 3 females. I could, if the New South Wales Health said, Ross, we're going to put you in a month's isolation, you know, I would probably take it. However, you know, this is what you see is this, it's purely a motive for control by the state. And if you can clothe the motive for control in, we really, really, really care about you, and so we have to take all of these measures. You know, I will tell you one tiny little boring story where I have my, in this regime, I have my heart rate taken twice a day by a group of at least 2 and usually 3 nurses. They are certainly described as nurses. They have a qualification in nursing. But since I don't regard anyone with a qualification as a doctor or nurse who does not believe in the Nuremberg doctrine of voluntary informed medical consent, I don't regard them as a doctor or a nurse. And so these guys wish to come and take my pulse twice a day for 7 days. Yet they had no little booties. They have PPP from top to bottom, but no booties on their shoes. So having had sufficient interactions with the Department of New South Wales Health nurses, brackets, guards, in this facility, which is somewhere between an insane asylum, a Goulburn Supermax, and a hotel. It's kind of somewhere on that spectrum. I said, I don't want you guys, 2 of you, traipsing into my room, taking my heart rate twice a day, when there is not a single patient out of 7.5 billion people globally who has ever been diagnosed with COVID as a consequence of their heart rate.
That's right.
So they said to me, well, I said, why don't you wear booties on your feet if you've got everything else? They said, well, we're coming to take your heart rate because there's no risk of infection as a consequence of transmission from the shoes of the nurses. So naturally, I immediately jumped onto Google and found the CDC has indeed cited a case of a Chinese study showing that doctors and nurses traipsing around a hospital could pick up COVID on the soles of their feet and drag it from one ward to the next. So I explained to the nurses that if you don't have booties on your feet, you are not welcome in my room, because I am deeply, deeply concerned about the risk of transmission. So there you go.
Yes, we must be very concerned, Ross, that is for sure. Now, we need to move on now. We do have John Ruddick's blistery history, and we're going to have to keep it very short. Sorry, John. What have you got for us this week?
Well, I'd like to talk about the Australian Labor Party. Now, you know, well, look, we're very critical of the Liberal Party, and one of the reasons we're very critical of the Liberal Party is because that the official opposition is so useless that the Liberal Party can keep winning elections and be mediocre. And it's really the Labor Party is a big reason why, I'm talking at a federal level, why we have such dreadful government in this country at the moment. Now, Australia started 120 years ago as a Commonwealth. In that time, the Republicans and the Democrats have almost precisely equally shared the White House. They've basically had it 50-50. Number 10 Downing Street in Britain, there's a little edge in favour of the Conservatives, but it's basically also been 50-50. In Australia, it's close to 75% of the time it's been held by the right of centre party, and only 25% of the time by the Labor Party. The Labor Party has only had 2 successful prime ministers since Federation. People don't realise this because we keep getting our history books are written by Labor Party supporters. And everyone thinks, we hear about Ben Chifley and John Curtin and Gough Whitlam and Bob Hawke, okay? Do you know out of the 7 longest serving prime ministers in this country, only one of them is from the Labor Party. All the rest of them were from the other side, okay? And the other side has basically been, they've changed their name over the years, but it's basically been one party since Federation. Now,
yes.
What I wanted to say is this. In 1901, we had our first federal election. There were 75 seats in the House of Representatives. The Labor Party won 14 seats, which was nothing. They were a very distant third. But over that first decade, they kept growing in power. Now, there was a very brief Labor Party Prime Minister in about 1903, a guy called Chris Watson. He was the Prime Minister for about there he is, Mr. Chris Watson, who later defected from the Labor Party to the other side. But he was there, didn't win an election, just on the floor of Parliament, he was there briefly. Then the great Labor hero in those early days, the guy that was Labor, is a guy called Andrew Fisher, who was a very impressive guy. He was a Scottish miner, very working class, a very sincere Christian, an absolutely extreme racist, okay? Well, like most of these early Labor Party guys, extreme racist and a really hardcore socialist, and he combined that with Christianity. Anyway, go figure. Now, what happened was Labor starts with his low base in 1901. By 1910, the Labor Party was the first party to win a majority in either the Senate or the House of Representatives, and Andrew Fisher won big majorities in both the Senate and the House. It was the first time we had a strong Prime Minister was Andrew Fisher. And he really wanted to turn Australia into this socialist utopia, no doubt about it. Okay, and the High Court wouldn't let him. He had the legislative power to do it. And so he put up these referendums to try and change the Constitution. The High Court, thank God, held him back. And then they had at his next election, he lost by 1 vote. Then he made come back in World War I. Anyway, we then had in the middle of World War I, Andrew Fisher is the Prime Minister. He has this mental breakdown because of Gallipoli. He basically walks away. Billy Hughes takes over as the Labor Prime Minister. There he is, Billy Hughes, one of the most, nobody has served in Parliament longer than Billy Hughes. Okay, but then he then defects there's been 3 Labor Party splits in our history. Billy Hughes did the first Labor Party split where they defect to the right side of politics. Now then the Labor Party was out of power until 1929 after Billy Hughes defected. Then we had this Labor government, a guy called James Scullin. He gets elected, he's all excited. And 2 days after they get sworn in, Wall Street crashes and it's the most chaotic government in Australian history. Then they got tossed out after 1 term. Then we had the United Australia Party and Joe Lyons was a very successful government. Then you had, in the 1940s, you had the first ever successful Labor Prime Minister, which was John Curtin. Now, he was successful because of World War II and the Americans helped stop the Japanese invasion. So it was easy to bask in the glory of it. Okay. But then you had Ben Chifley, who won 1 election but then lost badly. And then the Labor Party was out of power for 23 years. There he is, Ben Chifley. Then you had Gough Whitlam was a very impressive guy, a very smart guy, okay, and a very intelligent, just a majestic type of a figure, no question about it. And I think basically in his heart, not a bad bloke, but very misguided. He genuinely believed in socialism. That was only a 3-term government. So Labor Party has had like one failure after another, except for maybe John Curtin. Now, then they had Bob Hawke comes along in 1983, and Bob Hawke decided to betray everything that the Labor Party ever stood for. Okay, he says, I'm a trade union guy. I used to be the leader of the ACTU. Now, what he didn't say is, all my policies are basically copied from Margaret Thatcher. And then Paul Keating was his treasurer. Paul Keating knocks off, look, Bob Hawke won 4 elections. No other Labor Prime Minister had won more than 2. So Bob Hawke was this extraordinary success for the Labor Party. People of my age, I'm 51, they sort of thought we had this long Labor government, Hawke and Keating, then we had this long Liberal government under John Howard. So we had like 25 years of political stability in this country, but that is actually an unusual situation. We've had a lot of instability ever since. Anyway, my point is this: the stupid Labor Party, which are controlled by trade unions, still to this day, they started in the 1890s to just be a voice for trade unions in the parliament. One way or another, they've become the sort of the leading party on the left, but they are held back because of trade unions. And trade unions suffer by being suffocated by a political party, and the political party suffers by being chained to the trade union movement. So as much as we like to be critical of the Liberal Party, and there's a lot to be critical of them, we are hoping to replace them over the next decade, no question about it. But the Labor Party is really a big cause of the political problems in this country. Here endeth the lesson.
Well, there's a comment here from, where are we? Nadia. Nadia says, so what you're saying, John, is that so-called right-of-centre parties have caused all the socialism we live with in Australia, given they've been in government far longer than Labor.
Well, look, that's sort of it in a nutshell. What has happened is that because Labor's been so useless politically, they hardly ever have won 2 out of the last 9 elections so far, since 96. And they only win when they do win. Gough Whitlam was from the right of the Labor Party. Kevin Rudd used to put ads on TV. I'm just like John Howard. I'm an economic conservative, just like John Howard. They can only win by pretending to be right wingers. Now, but it's the Liberal, because they're so useless. The Liberal Party just thinks, okay, well, we could put up like someone like ScoMo. It doesn't really believe in anything, or even Malcolm Turnbull. And we put them up. We think, well, they've just got to be a little bit to the right of a very left Labor Party, and we'll get all of right wing Australia to vote for us, and the middle. Well, hello, there's a little group now called the minor parties on the right, the UAP, the glorious Liberal Democrats, the best alternative, of course, and they have, it's a recipe for a revolt on the right, what the Liberal Party has done. And that's where we are today.
That's exactly right. And obviously, join the party, donate, volunteer, get involved, get to our website, ldp.org.au, and be part of this movement. There's plenty of work going on with the federal campaigns coming up. And then Victoria, for example, has the state election next year as well. So there's plenty of volunteer opportunities to get out there and help. Now, we are going to go to a pre-recorded clip of David Limbrick today that he sent in today, just a little update from him, because he is doing more media tonight, as with Cam. So we are going to go to that clip now from David Limbrick.
Hi everyone, it's David Limbrick here. I'm sorry I couldn't join you tonight, but I thought I'd give you a message anyway to fill you in on some of the things that have been happening over the last week or so. The big thing, of course, was the pandemic bill in Victoria. I think everyone would know about this. This is the government wanting to get new powers to replace the current emergency powers that they have. We fought a big campaign against that, and unfortunately it passed the upper house last week in Parliament. Look, one of the things that happened was they had what's called a committee of the whole, and what that is where you go through each part of the bill clause by clause and you get to ask questions and clarify things in the bill. And this is really, really important because in the future, this can be used for legal challenges and things like this. So the government has to be very careful about what they say, and also we want to ask as many pertinent questions as we can. This turned out to be an absolute marathon session. I think Parliament was sitting for, I think it was like 25 hours or something, and I think it was about 23 of that was just debating, and this was constant. So this went all through the night, in the morning, and it was pretty exhausting. And to her credit, the Attorney General kept it up the whole time. She was on the receiving end of all this, but I was leading a lot of the debate on this, along with Catherine Cumming, Independent. Many of you would know her. Also, the Liberal Party. A few of their members, Georgie Crozier and a few others, had lots of questions as well. But yeah, I mean, we got some important things on the record as well. So, how one of the things that people were concerned about were being able to use powers to target specific groups. And I brought up how in previous pandemics many years ago, like the HIV pandemic, there were many horrible suggestions at the time about the types of things that government might do. Now, fortunately, the government didn't have the power to do those things back then. And I wanted to make sure that the government would never, target things based on something like sexuality. And I got that on the record by the government, so that's good. There's a whole bunch of other things that we were asking about detail. So we got some really good insight into the timeline of when these committees are going to get set up, what sort of oversight, how the oversight's going to work, all that sort of thing. We got that all on the record, so that was really good. I was pretty exhausted after that, and so was everyone else. The other thing that's been big in the news, there's been lots of protests. So there was big protests on the weekends, like the last 3 Saturdays in a row. There's been just massive protests. I've attended 2 of those. I haven't been speaking at these protests or leading these protests. I've just been going along and talking to people. The Liberal Democrats have been having a presence at these protests. And I think this is really important because there's this sort of narrative out there that everyone at these protests, and this is a narrative stirred up by the media and the government and everyone, there's this narrative out there that the protesters are some sort of, right-wing extremists and all this sort of nonsense. And I think what's very apparent at the protests is just how diverse they are. I wouldn't classify them as any one particular political ideology, any particular ethnic group, or anything at all. I think that they're very representative of a wide range of people who have concerns about the types of power that the government's getting. Lots of mum and dads worried about kids. Lots of immigrant groups. So one of the striking things at the protests is people carrying flags, which is the country of their origin. And many of these people came to Australia because of our freedoms here. They believed that we were a free country. Many of these people that I spoke to used to live in authoritarian regimes. Had people who'd fled places like communist Soviet Russia or Poland or many of these other European and Asian countries, and they know what authoritarianism is, and they wanted to make a stand. I had one person comment to me, I've already fled one country, I don't want to flee another. I want to fight for the freedoms of the people in the new country that I live and call home now, which I thought was really poignant. So I've been trying to disrupt the idea that these people are, right-wing extremists and stuff. So everything I've been doing in Parliament and in the media has been all around that. And also, the idea that a lot of people have been dehumanised. So, and I've spoken about this many times in Parliament. They just smear people as, anti-vaxxers, and these people are already feeling like they're left behind, they're locked out of society, they're lesser people than everyone else. And I just think that's totally wrong for a government to talk about their own citizens like that and encourage the rest of the population to talk about their own citizens like that. These are people that are just as valuable as everyone else and deserve to be treated with the same respect as everyone else, whether or not people agree with them. So look, we're doing what we can to fight back against that. A lot of people ask me what's next. Well, now that the government has these powers, we have to do everything that we can to push the government to use these powers as responsibly as possible. And that means that they're going to have to draw up some sort of new direction soon. I'm hopeful from some of the messaging that's been coming out of the government recently. They seem to have softened their stance on, you know, mandates and this segregation that they've got. And, you know, the Premier said they were talking about weeks rather than months, which makes me hopeful that they're not going to run this all through the next year and that it might end soon. We could even be as lucky as they won't use the new pandemic powers for this. That might be an option. I don't want to get people's hopes up too much, but it's certainly a possibility that when we get to the 16th, they decide not to do that. We'll have to wait and see what they come up with, but we're paying very close attention to that. But yeah, we're going to continue this fight because we're not happy with the way that our society's been divided like this, and we're concerned about, you know, especially what's going to happen next winter. We've seen in the Northern Hemisphere, a lot of these governments that have these powers, they were sort of freed up over summer, and then once winter hits, they're back in lockdown again. We just can't keep doing this over and over and over every year. There has to be a better solution. I mean, the government needs to respect people's individual choices rather than carry on risk management for the entire population. So yeah, I mean, that's where we're at the moment. Also, we've started the federal campaign. So I've announced I've announced that that I intend to run for the Senate once that's announced. I'll also be running with two other fantastic candidates, Crystal Mitchell and Carolyn White, who you would also have seen on Liberty Chat and in other places. They attended some of these protests as well with me, and it was great to speak with so many people who were at the protests and you know, stand with Carolyn and Crystal and LDP Liberal Democrat supporters who, you know, they went to a lot of work in organising everything and, you know, getting T-shirts and all this sort of stuff. So it was really great. So if you're taking holidays, you know, make sure that you get some rest over the break. I won't be taking too much rest. I'll be taking a little bit, but I'll probably speak to you again before Christmas. So I won't wish Merry Christmas to everyone yet. But yeah, I look forward to catching up with everyone in person again soon. Thanks very much.
We do thank David for doing that for us today. As I said, he is busy tonight doing some more media, promoting the party, obviously promoting his Senate run, which is fantastic. There's a lot of comments here, a lot of comments of love for David, which is fantastic. Now, there's also a few questions now that we're back here about the childhood vaccine mandates now coming in. And I know that it's something that, Ross, that you've been particularly interested in, as am I, because at the moment my son is 10 and we're okay. Ross, can you talk about your opinion on that very, very briefly for us before we close out for the night?
Look, I just want to say, if we drill down and say to this gathering, sorry for the plane flying overhead, I actually like to hear the sound of a plane flying. Every time I see one, I think about, you know, the addition to the terms of trade. But the point I want to make is, what is the most urgent question facing us today? Let's say we are the Christians in the catacombs huddled together as the centurions march over the top. The injection of children with an experimental drug which has no whole of life evidence as to its safety and efficacy, on the basis of the urgency of, you know, a pandemic, which according to the most recent German study of, I think, over 30,000 German children, no child had died from COVID. Yet we wish to inject the child with this combination of experimental chemicals, not because we wish to protect the health of the child, but because allegedly we wish to protect somebody else's health. And I just want to have a crack, okay? I don't like having a crack, but I prefer to give a bouquet. Okay, but sometimes, as you know, as we know from the study of Western literature, criticism is helpful. I am emphatically opposed to the injection of children with experimental drugs. I believe it is one of the most serious offences a person can commit, absolutely on a par with any of the other child-related offences. Because here is a creature who is relying on our judgment and trusting in our good faith to look after us, to protect us, yet here we are proposing to inject children with chemicals in order to protect someone else. Mm. And I say the single most powerful lever in this argument is the teacher union.
Oh, and now we've lost him. Well, he was clearly, you know, they were watching him in hotel quarantine and didn't like that discussion.
That's what happened, yes.
Yes, as Benjamin said, ASIO's cut him off. Scott, controlled HQ network, illegal thoughts, says Ryan. Well, wow. I mean, I totally agree with what Ross was saying there. I think it's just appalling. And someone further up just said there was a great comment from Heather Hying, who's also one of my favorite podcasts. Adam says, Heather Hying from the Dark Horse podcast, wife of Brett Weinstein, made the point recently that vaccinating children for the COVID vax should lead to the sort of conversation that we would be having if the authorities were thinking of bringing back military conscription. Yeah, that's an interesting thought there. And Ross, you're back, but I'm going to give you 30 seconds. 30 seconds,
well,
Ross.
I'm just saying to you, if people come out of this saying, I went to a LibDem, you know, Liberty Chat, and the one thought I was asked to take out of it.
All right. No, your internet is terrible now.
As you go into 22, question that matters. Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes. Now, but now you've only got 10 seconds.
Okay. I'm saying next year oppose the injection of children with experimental drugs.
100% agree. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us tonight. Now, I know you're both very prolific on Twitter. What are your Twitter handles? How can we follow you on Twitter? Ross Cameron?
At Ross Cameron 4. My biggest influence on my Twitter feed is John Ruddick.
Excellent. And John Ruddick, how do we follow you?
At John Ruddick 2.
Excellent. And then also we've obviously got your Facebook candidate page as well. Follow, like, share, support. Like we've really just got to spread the message. Obviously our Freedom Manifesto, we're working on the videos now for each of those 10 policies to get those messages out. Thank you one and all for joining us. As I said, join the party, donate to causes and campaigns that we have going on, volunteer your time. We've got a lot of work coming on, and that's just ldp.org.au. And as I said, thanks again, everyone, for joining us. We'll see you next week.
Kirsty. See you next week.
Thanks, Kirsty.
Everybody.
Bye.
Good night.